In the late autumn of 1887, the Holloway family of Dorset, England, unveiled a new treasure in their grand estate, a portrait of their youngest daughter, Eleanor. The painting had been commissioned during the summer months, when the girl was said to be in perfect health, glowing with youthful energy. It was, by all accounts, a masterpiece, a depiction so vivid that guests often remarked it seemed as though Eleanor might step right out of the frame at any moment. The portrait was hung in the main gallery, where the sunlight poured in through high windows and bathed the canvas in warmth. In daylight, nothing appeared unusual. The girl's eyes were gentle, her lips soft and faintly smiling, her skin pale but alive with the delicate blush of youth. It was everything a family of status desired, a symbol of beauty, wealth, and permanence. But from the very beginning, the servants were uneasy. By candlelight, when shadows lengthened across the gallery, they claimed the portrait seemed to shift. Eleanor's expression, once serene, hardened into something more unsettling. Her eyes, so bright in daylight, seemed to sink back into her skull at night. Her smile curled downward, as if mocking anyone who lingered too long in the room. One maid swore that as she polished the silver nearby, she saw the girl's skin take on a grey, sickly hue, like that of a corpse pulled from the ground. Word spread quietly among the staff, though none dared to mention it to the Holloways. In Victorian England, servants were often dismissed for superstition. Still, whispers carried through the house. The portrait was not normal. There was something alive in it. Or perhaps something dead. Guests who stayed overnight began to notice it too. One family friend, a reverend, later wrote in his diary that while passing the gallery after dusk, he felt an oppressive chill, as though invisible eyes were watching him. He turned, and in the dim flicker of gaslight, he could have sworn Eleanor's painted lips had parted slightly, revealing teeth clenched tight in a grimace. He never returned to the estate. The Holloways, for their part, dismissed these accounts as nonsense. To them, the portrait was a triumph, proof of their daughter's beauty and of their own refinement in commissioning such a fine work. They encouraged visitors to admire it, even as unease grew in the household. But the truth was darker than they realized. Eleanor had died just weeks before the portrait was finished. She had succumbed suddenly to illness, her body buried quietly in the churchyard. The artist, a man whose name remained faint and nearly illegible in the corner of the canvas, claimed he had painted her from memory. Yet some believed he had seen her more recently, not alive, but laid out cold and pale upon the stone slab of the family crypt. And so, the Holloways hung their daughter's portrait proudly in the gallery, never knowing they had welcomed something else into their home. Something that would only reveal itself when the sun went down. It didn't take long for the Holloway household staff to form their own silent pact: avoid the gallery after dark. During the day, they performed their duties dutifully, dusting shelves, polishing frames, and sweeping the cold marble floors. But once evening descended, once the candles and gas lamps were lit, the servants would take great care to move quickly through the corridors, never lingering near the portrait. The whispers began with the maids, those who worked closest to the gallery. One young girl, barely 16, claimed she had heard faint scratching noises coming from behind the canvas, the sound of fingernails dragging across wood. Another said she had felt a sudden coldness brush her skin as she passed, though the fire in the hearth was still burning bright. Soon, even the butler, a man of strict rational mind, admitted he found the atmosphere in the gallery unbearable at night. "It is as though the very air recoils from that painting," he confided quietly to the cook. When the Holloways entertained guests, they insisted upon candle-lit tours of their estate. The portrait was always the highlight. Family, friends, and acquaintances would gather before it, admiring Eleanor's beauty and remarking on the artist's skill. Yet as the night wore on, the conversations would falter. Visitors began reporting an unnerving sensation, that the painted girl's eyes followed them across the room. Some even claimed they saw her lips twitch, as though about to speak. The rumors spread among the household staff like wildfire, though they were careful not to voice them too loudly. Victorian society was quick to brand superstition as foolishness, and no servant wanted to risk their livelihood. Instead, the whispers were traded in hushed tones in kitchens and servants' quarters after the family had gone to bed. But soon the guests themselves began to confirm what the servants already feared. One evening, a friend of the Holloways, a young barrister from London, refused to stay another night under their roof. He claimed that while he was crossing the gallery, he saw Eleanor's painted face shift before his eyes. The skin along her cheeks sagged, her mouth pulled into a silent scream, and her once gentle eyes became hollow voids. He left immediately, never to return. The Holloways dismissed these claims as overactive imagination, insisting the portrait was nothing more than paint and canvas. Yet each new visitor seemed to leave with a story, a strange impression they could not explain. The house, once known for its warmth and hospitality, began to earn a darker reputation. Locals whispered of the rotting girl in the frame, and carriage drivers spoke of hearing faint sobs drifting from the Holloway gallery windows at night. By 1889, even the Holloway children refused to pass through the gallery after sunset. They begged their parents to move the portrait, to lock it away, but their pleas were ignored. For the Holloways, the painting was a tribute, a memorial to their beloved Eleanor. For everyone else, it was something else entirely, a doorway to something they did not understand. The portrait of Eleanor Holloway bore a faint signature in the lower corner, so faint it was nearly invisible. The letters were smeared, as though written with trembling hands. Some believed it read R. Mallory, others E. Malin. No two eyes seemed to agree. When the Holloways attempted to locate the artist for a second commission, they found nothing. No records of his studio, no mention in art guilds, and no apprentices who had ever worked under his name. It was as though the man had appeared only long enough to paint the portrait and then vanished into the shadows of history. Locals in Dorset whispered darker rumours. They said a strange man had been seen near the churchyard on stormy nights, wandering among the gravestones. Others claimed he lodged briefly at a small inn on the outskirts of town, where he unnerved patrons with his pale, unblinking stare. The innkeeper swore that he carried with him jars and bottles filled with dark liquids, which he jealously guarded and refused to let out of sight. An old gravedigger later told a chilling story. One evening, while digging near Eleanor's burial plot, he saw a man seated on the ground, sketching feverishly by lamplight. When confronted, the stranger offered him a handful of coins and urged him to keep quiet. "Her beauty must not be forgotten," the man whispered, before vanishing into the night. The Holloways, of course, never revealed these tales to their guests. To them, the painter had been eccentric, but nothing more. They paid him generously, and he delivered a likeness of their daughter so lifelike that it seemed to capture her very soul. That, in their minds, was all that mattered. But questions lingered. What pigments had he used to achieve such unnatural depth in Eleanor's eyes? Why did the colours of her skin seem to shift between light and shadow, between warmth and decay? Some suggested that the artist had mixed human remains into his paints, ground bone, dried blood, or even ash. The story spread that he was part of a small, forbidden sect of painters who specialized not in portraits of the living, but in images of the dead. These painters, it was said, believed that death was not an end but a doorway, and that through their work they could trap fragments of the departed between canvas and reality. The more the Holloway servants whispered, the more the painting seemed to confirm it. Eleanor's face did not simply appear painted. It appeared suspended, hovering between life and death, as though some part of her had been pulled back from the grave and fixed in oil and pigment. By the early 1890s, collectors and historians alike tried to trace the artist's identity. None succeeded. Some concluded that he had died, others that he had never truly existed. Yet the portrait remained, growing darker with each passing year, as though the unknown painter's influence had not ended with his disappearance. He had left something behind, something alive, restless, and unwilling to be forgotten. By the early 1890s, the Holloways began to notice what the servants had whispered for years. The portrait was not staying the same. At first the changes were subtle, almost dismissible as tricks of light. Eleanor's cheeks, once rosy with youth, appeared paler, almost sunken. The soft smile the artist had captured seemed tighter now, as though her lips pressed together in grim silence. But as time passed, the alterations grew impossible to ignore. Guests who had seen the painting in its first year returned to find it transformed. "She looks older," one visitor remarked uneasily, "as though years have passed for her in the frame." The Holloways laughed nervously, insisting it was only dust, or perhaps the fading of paint. But no one could explain why, in certain lights, Eleanor's skin seemed tinged with grey, or why her eyes appeared hollow, ringed with shadows that had not been there before. Servants complained of a faint odor in the gallery, not the mustiness of an old house, but something sharper, more organic, like the stench of damp earth or rotting flesh. Candles sputtered strangely when lit near the canvas, their flames bending as though recoiling from the image. One maid, bold enough to confess her fears to her mistress, said she had watched the painting for nearly an hour one evening. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she swore she saw Eleanor's painted face change before her eyes. The cheeks sagged, the eyes grew darker, and the teeth, faintly visible through parted lips, looked yellowed, decayed. When the maid screamed, others rushed in, but by then the portrait had returned to its usual, though slightly altered state. The Holloways dismissed the maid and refused to acknowledge her claims, yet the rumors continued to spread. Some visitors began to refuse entry to the gallery altogether. A young woman fainted during a tour, insisting she had seen the painted Eleanor move. A reverend who had once admired the portrait now declared it a work of unholy inspiration, warning the Holloways to destroy it before it corrupted the entire house. But destruction was not so simple. On one occasion, the Holloway patriarch attempted to scrub the canvas with oils, hoping to clean what he thought was a strange film forming across the paint. To his horror, the more he rubbed, the more the girl's face seemed to fade into something skeletal beneath the brush. He stopped at once, shaken, and never tried again. By 1895, the portrait no longer looked like the vibrant girl who had once posed for it. Instead, it bore the likeness of someone touched by death. Sallow skin, sunken eyes, and a faint sneer that seemed to grow sharper with each passing year. Visitors left the estate whispering that the Holloways were cursed, that they had trapped their daughter between life and death, and that the portrait was her prison. And all the while, Eleanor's image continued to decay, as though the grave itself was slowly swallowing her from inside the frame. By the turn of the century, the Holloway estate had become a house of whispers. Servants came and went with unusual speed, often leaving after only weeks of service. Guests no longer accepted invitations, and the once celebrated gallery, meant to showcase the family's wealth and refinement, had become a locked chamber, avoided even in daylight. The portrait remained within, festering. Eleanor's image, once so alive and delicate, was now almost unrecognizable. Her cheeks sagged, her lips were grey, and her eyes seemed to sink deeper with each passing year. The faint smile that had once graced her features had twisted into a cruel sneer, the expression of someone both mocking and vengeful. The Holloways lived in constant dread, yet they refused to let the outside world know the truth. Their pride bound them in silence. And then, in the spring of 1903, the portrait was gone. The discovery was made by the butler, who had been ordered to clean the gallery for the first time in months. When he entered, the wall where the portrait had always hung was bare. The golden hooks were still in place, but the canvas itself had vanished, as if plucked from existence. The family was stunned. The windows were locked, the doors secured. No signs of intrusion could be found. The Holloways claimed, at least publicly, that they had decided to store the painting elsewhere, yet no one in Dorset believed them. Rumours spread like wildfire. Some insisted the family had buried it deep in their crypt alongside Eleanor herself, sealing it away from prying eyes. Others claimed they had sold it in secret, trading their cursed heirloom to collectors who dealt in forbidden artifacts. But the darker whispers suggested something else entirely, that the painting had left on its own. Servants swore they had heard footsteps in the gallery on the night it disappeared. Not the hurried tread of a thief, but the slow, deliberate movement of someone who belonged there. A maid insisted she saw a figure slip through the hallway, pale and faint, carrying something large and rectangular in its arms. When she followed, the corridor was empty. For years afterward, the Holloways refused to speak of it. They lived quietly, rarely entertaining, and grew reclusive within their estate. Their once proud family name became tainted, spoken of in hushed tones throughout the countryside. They were no longer the Holloways of wealth and refinement, but the Holloways of the rotting girl, the cursed family who had harboured a painting that should never have existed. Yet the disappearance did not end the story. Reports surfaced in London, whispered among collectors and curators. A painting matching the description appeared in a private sale, then vanished again. A gallery in Paris allegedly displayed it briefly before closing its doors under mysterious circumstances. The trail was faint, but it never fully died. The Holloways may have lost the portrait, but the world had not. It had simply slipped into the shadows, waiting for its next home. After its disappearance from the Holloway estate in 1903, the portrait was never officially seen again, but that did not mean its story ended. On the contrary, the decades that followed only deepened the mystery. What had once been a local curiosity in Dorset grew into a legend whispered across Europe, passed between collectors, historians, and those who traded in cursed relics. In 1921, a Parisian art dealer claimed to have acquired a death portrait of a young girl believed to be painted in England during the late 1800s. He described it in a private letter as a canvas that shifts with the passing of day into night. The letter mentioned that the girl's face, angelic by daylight, became as hollow as the grave after dark. The dealer died in his sleep only days later, and the painting was never found among his possessions. In the 1940s, during the chaos of the Second World War, rumors resurfaced that German officers had confiscated a strange artwork from a London collector. It was said to unsettle even the most hardened men, some of whom swore the figure in the painting moved. After the war, no record of the portrait appeared in any recovered archives. To this day, some historians wonder if it was destroyed or if it slipped into another private collection, hidden away once more. But the most chilling reports came from the late 20th century. In 1989, a small private gallery in London was said to have displayed the portrait briefly, unlisted, and only to invited guests. The staff refused to discuss it openly, but one guard who worked there told a tabloid that he had quit his position after a single night. He claimed that as he passed the canvas during his patrol, the painted girl's lips curled into a smile. It wasn't a trick of light, he swore. Her teeth showed. She was smiling at me. Other stories trickled through the years. An American collector allegedly, I purchased the piece at an underground auction in 2003, but died suddenly before he could transport it home. The shipment containing the painting never arrived at its destination, vanishing somewhere between ports. Some believe it remains hidden in storage, forgotten, waiting for someone to unearth it. Others say it has already found a new home, its influence spreading silently, like rot, wherever it hangs. Today, the legend of the Holloway portrait circulates on forums, in paranormal books, and among collectors of cursed objects. Theories abound. Some believe the painting trapped Eleanor's soul, suspended between life and death. Others claim the unknown painter had bound something far older, something darker, into the canvas, using the likeness of the dead girl as its mask. What is certain is this: no one knows where the portrait is now. It could be hidden in a crypt, locked in a collector's vault, or even hanging on an unsuspecting wall. And if the whispers are true, then wherever it rests, the girl still rots in the dark, waiting for nightfall to reveal her true face.